I'm Catherine.
And I'm Daniela.
We
We
are
are
the
the twins.
Hello and welcome to our show, and thank you for watching.
We appreciate all of you so much. And if you like our videos, please like and subscribe for more. Thank you. So nice having you here today.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's my interest in ancient mystery started when I was a little kid. I'd always been fascinated with ancient legends, mythology, and at that time, when I was a young boy, there was a couple of TV programs that were really popular. One was called In Search Of. I don't know if you ever saw that. It was with Leonard Nimoy, and he hosted this show, and he talked about like the pyramids of Egypt and UFOs and just unexplained phenomenon, and it just captivated me. And I was
Amazing.
yeah, I was a type of kid, that got interested in that stuff, and I would go to the school library and check out any books they had on that. And so it started from a very young age, yeah, and then it just developed.
That's great.
Yeah, it developed as an adult. I was able to travel overseas when I was younger and went to some really interesting places over in Mexico, Teotihuacan, the giant pyramids over there. I've been to some interesting places over in Europe, Chartres Cathedral, which was built by the Knights Templar. That's right outside of Paris. And um, in Scotland, Rosslyn Chapel. Supposedly, people thought that the Holy Grail was once hidden there at that church. So I've just always been interested in, mysterious places and artifacts and just unexplained things. And I heard a presentation about 5 or 6 years ago by Jim Vieira, and he did a presentation on giants. And I always was interested in giants. In the Bible, in Genesis 6:4, it says there were giants in the earth in those days and thereafter, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore them children. They became mighty men, men of renown. And there's a lot. There's a lot to that passage. And I started researching about the giants, and I saw a presentation by Jim Vieira and evidence that he had found in North America of these giant skeletons being discovered. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, is this true? Is this a hoax? Or, what's going on? And he kept showing all these old newspaper articles that talked about these skeletons, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet tall, being found. Some of them had double rows of teeth, which I found was interesting, because in the Bible, when David and his mighty men were fighting the giants, Goliath's brother, there is a specific giant mentioned. I believe his name was Saph. He had a double row of teeth, and he had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. And
Wow.
yeah, so I became very interested in that subject, and so I started looking into these old newspaper databases and subscribing to them. And I kept finding all these old articles of these discoveries all throughout North America. And I thought, this is just, there's so much evidence. Yes, maybe some of them could have been mismeasured. Maybe there could have been a few hoaxes, but I think right now there's close to 2,000 newspaper articles out there of these discoveries. So even if a small percentage of them were true, there's something to the story. And I came across one particular story that fascinated me because it had so much evidence. There was photographic evidence. There was artifacts that came out of this cave that you can still see to this day. There were the Paiute tales of these giants, the Native Americans that lived in that area. And it's called Lovelock Cave, and that's in Nevada. And so I started really digging into that whole story. And I uncovered a lot of evidence. Like I said, photographic evidence. I have a picture of one of the giant skulls that came out of that cave. There is. I mean, this is my belief that these realms coexist with us, and they're not always obviously physically visible, but they're around us. There are angels around us. There are, as the Bible says, there's unseen powers and principalities around us. And if you're a materialist and you don't believe in God, then you could have a miracle happen to you. It could be right in your face, but you won't see it. You won't recognize it. You'll say, "Oh, that's luck. That's
Exactly.
chance. That's
Yeah.
just coincidence, right?"
Mm.
But these realms are all around us, and if we are
That's amazing.
and if we tune into to these realms, as you know, we can more readily experience and see these miracles around us every day.
Exactly.
Since I was a child, yes, I just had an interest in ancient mysteries, and I'm a very curious person and curious about the world, where we come from, where we're going. And so, yeah, from a very young age, I've researched these particular subjects, and I could talk for hours. I've heard of other people that I know personally that have had that out of body experience. One is a friend I've known since I was a child, and he was having a surgery. I think it was a major dental surgery. And he said, "Floyd, I floated up above my body." And he goes, "I was looking down at them doing the surgery on my mouth." And he said he could vividly describe like everybody in the room. And
Wow.
I gave each story or experience a name. And so
That's great.
So I call this one guardian angel because I believe it was a guardian angel. So I was about 12 years old, and I was walking home from school, and I was on a very busy street, and I crossed against the light. It was a don't walk. And being a kid, and I was impatient. I looked both ways and thought, I don't want to wait for the light to change. So I started to walk across the street. So when I stepped out onto the street, a bus was coming right at me. And it was luckily it had slammed its brakes on, and it was coming directly at me. And I remember looking at the bus and freezing. Like the old expression, deer in headlights, right? Like you see something coming at you and you just freeze. And so I froze, and I see this giant bus coming at me. And I don't know, I can't explain it, but I took I don't know if I was being pulled back, or I somehow had presence of mind to take one step back on the curb. And so I take a step back on the curb, and the bus missed me. If it would have hit me, it would have killed me. There would have been probably no way I would have survived. However, the side view mirror of the bus hits me in the head. It hits me in the head, and I'm flying in the air. I must have been 3 or 4 feet in the air. I remember seeing a bright light, a flash. And then I remember I was laying on the curb, and I opened my eyes, and the bus driver was standing over me, and someone who had witnessed this happening was standing over me. And I just remember them saying, "Kid, are you okay? Are you okay?" And the guy not the bus driver, but the other guy that witnessed it, he said, "Hey, I'm going to take you to the hospital. I'm going to take you to the hospital." And I said, no, because I didn't know who this guy was. He was a stranger. And I was completely scared out of my mind. And I remember the bus driver saying, "Oh, he looks okay. He looks okay." And so I get up, and I feel I have this knot on my head. It was huge. But I was so scared, I just ran off. I fled the scene. I left, and I ended up going home, and I had this huge goose egg on my head. And my mom, the first thing, she's like, "What on earth? What happened?" Of course, I was scared, and I didn't want to tell her that I was crossing against the light, and I got hit by a side view mirror of a bus, right? So I lied to her, and I said, I was playing at school, and I fell down and bumped my head. And needless to say, I was able to recover from that. I just had this big knot on my head for, however many days after that. But it was ironic because that company that is called TriMet, it's a public transportation company. Well, now I've worked for them for the past 24 years. That's who I work with. And so I think God has a sense of humor as well. So I think that was my guardian angel looking after me, because I could have easily have been killed. I could have went home from the injury I had and had a aneurysm. I could have had brain damage, and I came through it okay. Yeah, not too many people could say they got hit by a bus and was able to
Exactly.
get up and walk away from that.
Yes.
So that's one of my early experiences, which I firmly believe my guardian angel was looking after me.
Yes.
Yes. So then another experience that I had when I was a teenager, and this one I call it, I just wanted to say goodbye. That's the title of the experience. So I was a teenager. I was living with my parents in an apartment, and we had friends of the family that we had known for many, many years. My parents would get together with them and they would play cards on the weekend. And sometimes we would do family outings together. And they just been friends of the family for many years. And the husband's name was Tom, and his wife was named Patty. And Patty, she was a sweetheart, a very nice lady. My mom was just really good friends with her. They had worked together for many years. But she was very tall woman, and she had huge hands, these gigantic hands. Very, very large lady. And at any rate, so they would come on the weekends and they would play cards. And when they would come over, Patty would knock on the door, and it would be really loud. I guess she wouldn't realize, that it sounded so loud. She has these big old hands, and she'd knock on the door. And my dad would answer, and he would always tease her. He'd say, "Hey, what are you trying to do? Break the door down?" And he'd give her a hard time. And so one day they were over at my house. This is after Patty had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and her husband. Oh, and this is another interesting connection that I just realized. Her husband, Tom, you know what his job was? Worked for TriMet, which is the bus that hit me. And I've worked there for decades. But anyway, he worked for that company. And so his wife was going through chemotherapy, and he had to work during the day. And so my dad was home during the day, and he said, well, rather than put her in a care facility, why don't you just drop her off at our house, and I'll play cards with Patty and we'll hang out. And then when you get off work, you can come and pick her up. And so that was a really good arrangement. My dad could just hang out with her and play cards. And one day they were doing that, and Patty had a seizure, and she literally died in our apartment. It was a very sudden incident, and she passed away, and she passed away, and so very shortly after that happened, we heard knocking at our apartment. We would hear loud knocking on the door, and we'd open the door and there'd be no one there. We would hear knocking on the window, and we'd go open up the curtains. There'd be no one there. And sometimes we'd hear knocking on the walls, and we couldn't explain it. In fact, a couple days later, we were all sitting in the living room watching television, and my dad, he was kind of a tough guy, right? He didn't show a lot of emotions, and he said he believed in God, but he really didn't kind of, follow along with the way he lived his life. But I never really saw him scared. But we were all in the living room watching television, and there's a loud knocking at the door, and we all hear it. And he gets up and he opens the door, and there's no one there. And I look at my dad's face, and I could tell, like, he was scared. Like, he couldn't explain it. He could not explain this. And so this knocking continued for a number of days after Patty had passed away. And my mom mentioned it to our neighbors, who they were an older couple. And I don't know what denomination they were, but I know they were pretty religious. And my mom had mentioned to that couple what was happening. And the wife said, well, can I come over to your apartment? I'll bring my Bible, and I'll bring some holy water, and I'll sprinkle it and read some passages out of the Bible. And my mom said, sure. So she comes over. I'm in the apartment. My sister is there too. And this lady opens up, it had this old Bible. She opens it up and she starts reading passages and sprinkling holy water. And, back then I was probably like maybe 15 or 16. And to me, it was kind of strange. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of weird. I'm going to go hang out with my friends. So I left. Unfortunately, I wish I would have stayed there, but I left. So the rest of the story, my sister told me. And so she said she's watching this lady go through the house. She's sprinkling holy water, and all of a sudden she starts speaking, and her voice changes, and it gets deep. It gets very deep. And basically she says, this is Patty. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you guys. I just want to say goodbye. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. And so my sister is there and my mom is there, and they hear this. And she goes, I don't mean to frighten you, but I want to tell you goodbye. And from that point on, there was no more knocking. That really opened my eyes to the unseen realms, having experienced that firsthand. Like, I remember hearing the knocking. I remember hearing knocking on the door, and I'd open the door and there was no one there. My father, he claimed he believed in God, but he didn't walk the path. He was alcoholic and very, very violent when I was younger, to my mom and to myself. Back in 2000, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I never had a close relationship with him at all. But my mom was taking care of him, and then the hospice nurse was coming over and taking care of him. And I, even though I had no relationship with him, I mean, he was still my dad, right? Like, he was still like, part of me is like, he's still my dad, and I've got to respect him. So I asked my mom if I could help her, take care of him. And she said, absolutely. So when he was dying, I would help take care of him. And he couldn't believe it. Like, when I wasn't in the room, he would tell my mom, like, I can't believe Floyd's helping me. Like, because he knew, I could sense, like, he had a lot of regrets, what he had done and the way he had lived his life. And he just had a lot of regrets. Although he didn't tell me. He didn't need to tell me, because I sensed that. I just felt that. And so it came down to the point where he was dying and literally taking his last breaths. Like, I don't know if you've been around someone when they were dying, wheezing sound. Yes. Yeah. And so he was literally sucking in his last breaths, and right before he died, what he did, and it was one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life, is he opened his arms and he smiled and he said, Jesus. Wow. And he literally he died at that moment. That was his. It was amazing. It was really amazing. And to me, it was like the thief on the cross, like in the Bible, when Jesus was crucified, and there were the two robbers that were crucified next to him, and one of the robbers is mocking him, saying, if you're the Son of God, get us out of here. Come down off the cross, save us, And then the other thief is saying, don't you? He was rebuking the other thief. He said, don't you fear God? What the crimes we committed, we deserve this, but he doesn't deserve this. And then he just tells Jesus, he says, remember me. He just, because he believed and that was the Son of God. He said, remember me. And so that story in the Bible, it reminds me literally of what my dad went through, that he had lived a terrible life. And at that last moment, and I don't know when it happened in that process where he was dying, that, every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess. And I believe that he gave himself over to the Lord. And at that moment, his last few seconds on the earth, he proclaimed that. So I think, like I said, all of us have experiences, very few, but some people like yourself have these incredible experience, and then there's others like myself that have the real subtle, more subtle, but yet when you really look at them, you go, wow, that is a miracle. That's not chance. That's not coincidence. There's just something beyond that. I have another one for you. Maybe,
yes, please.
Maybe not quite so profound, but I thought it was interesting. So I was very close with my mother, and she passed away about 16 years ago, maybe almost 17 years ago. We were very, very close, very close with my mom. She's a very, very spiritual lady, very godly woman. I mean, I remember growing up, she would, like, every night she'd have her rosary out. She was Catholic. She had a rosary out, and she just prayed for like an hour, sometimes 2 hours. And if my mom said she was going to pray for you, she would pray for you. I mean, she had a long list of people that she would pray for. And at any rate, so my mom passed away, and I was there at her bedside, and I was glad, I was there with her. And so it hit me really hard, because I was very close with my mom. And, when both of your parents are gone, it really kind of your mortality starts to really hit you. And like, wow, my mom's gone, my dad's gone. And you start to look at life a little differently. And I was trying to sort things out, figure out like what I wanted to do, which direction I wanted to go as far as career wise. And I had been considering going back to school, and no one in my family ever went to college or graduated college. And I wanted to become a therapist. And of course, that takes a lot of education, a lot of schooling. And it was a big decision for me. And I remember just praying about it. And of course, I was real emotional. My mom had just passed away. And so this has really been on my mind for weeks on end. And one day, I was at work, and I took my lunch break, and there was a shopping mall nearby. And there was a bookstore in the shopping mall that I would go to. And, I love to read. And I just felt really compelled to like go to this bookstore. And I couldn't figure out why, because I really didn't want to buy. I didn't feel like reading another book. I had all this stuff in my head, but I was like, okay, I'll just go and look around. So I'm looking around the bookstore, and then I'm going by these books, and I felt really compelled to just start taking books out of the shelf and looking at them. And it was the weirdest thing, because it's like, I don't even want to buy a book. What am I doing? And so I just remember I'd pull out a book, and I would look at the cover, and I would, nope, that's not the one. And I would put it back in. I'd take another book, and I'd look at it. No, that's not the one. And I was thinking, am I going crazy? This is super weird. Like, why am I even doing this? And then I pulled out this one book, and I looked at the cover, and I go, no, not this. And as I'm putting it away, I see something in the book, like between the pages. And so I go, what? So I open the book, and inside this book is this little folded piece of paper, and it has a message on it. And the message says, for you to remember your forgotten dream, perhaps not so forgotten, you are ready, you are worthy, and now is the time to begin. And this message was there, and it's folded up over a dollar bill. And since I found this, I've kept this in my wallet, and I always keep it there. And so to me, this was the answer. This was in physical form. This was the answer that I needed to make that decision to go back to college. And since then, I've got my bachelor's in human development. I graduated at the top of my class, and I'm on the tail end of getting my master's degree in clinical counseling. I just have an internship that I need to finish. And this has been ongoing. This has been 16 years of going to school part-time and working and, trying to raise my boys and, juggle things around. But that was my experience. And I fully believe that through my prayer, that the answer came, and it was manifested in a piece of paper with a message that I just happened to find. And when I found this message, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, okay, the person that wrote this, maybe they wrote a whole bunch of them and stuck them in a bunch of books. So then I start taking down more books, and looking for more of these. And did I find them? No, this was my message for me. Your podcast, there are spiritual miracles around us, all the time. And the question is, are you attuned to them? Right? Do you believe? Do you have faith? Are you open to them? Because if you're not, if you're just living in the material world, then, these things are gonna be right in front of you, and you won't acknowledge them. You won't see them. So I believe that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
We hope you liked our video.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye. We want to pray for you today.
Please have Jesus in your heart.
Loving God, maker of heaven and earth, protect us in your love and mercy. Send the Spirit of Jesus to be with us, to still our fears and give us confidence. Angels of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here, ever this day be at my side, to like, to guard, to rule, to guide. Amen.